Welcome back to Final Trade and a table full of random cards. Just kidding, this is Counter Phoenix. Now, this is a deck that I was not actually familiar with when I played long ago and only learned about more recently. And let me tell you, I was hyper skeptical of this deck when I first learned about it. The idea of this deck is you have this one gimmick card, Shard Phoenix. And so he's got this ability to sacrifice to deal 2 damage to all grounded creatures, but you can pay 3 to put him back into your hand from your graveyard. And so, a 5 mana 2/2 is pretty bad, but he's got this really cool ability. And then somebody said, hey, let's build an entire deck around this one silly creature. And what it attempts to do is use all these counter spells. So 14 counter spells in the deck, including one that buys back if you want to discard cards. It uses all those counter spells to just kind of try to hang on while it gets the Shard Phoenix out, while it uses Lightning Bolt to kind of control a little bit, while it uses the Nevinyrral's Disc to keep the board clear. And it just barely hangs on long enough that it can eventually eke out a win by pecking away at your opponent with the Shard Phoenix. And, if you're skeptical of this, I was too until I started playing it. And even against aggro decks, this thing can win. And it's just unbelievable. There are so many cards in here that are so well selected. But one thing you really have to understand from the start, look at all this land. Now, I don't usually lay out the land when I feature decks like this, but I laid it out here. 14 islands, 10 mountains, and 4 reflecting pools. Okay? This deck just has a ton of land. That's 28 land. So the reason you need so much land is you've got Capsize and you've got Whispers of the Muse that both have expensive buyback abilities. And so eventually you want to start playing these, using them at the end of your opponent's turns just to disrupt them more, start capsizing things. And let me tell you, I have had games go long enough that every turn I started capsizing 2 of my opponent's lands. And eventually they end up with no land. They start discarding. But the whole point is to keep the counter spells going, to keep yourself just safe enough, keep the discs and the lightning bolt and the sacrifice ability on the Shard Phoenix just safe enough, lock down your opponent slowly over a long period of time. And, here's intuition. This is really great. You can just search your library for 3 Phoenixes, and you throw 2 of them in your graveyard and 1 in your hand. Big deal. Then you pick them back out of your graveyard later. And, it's another reason that this deck takes so much mana is the Phoenix is 5 mana, and then if you use his ability, you need to pay 3 more during your next upkeep to pull it back to your hand. And so there's just so much need for mana in here. And like I've said, when I saw a deck list originally that was close to 30 lands, I can't think of another deck that runs that many lands. So I was very, very skeptical. There's also the one recall in case you have some kind of extreme problem and you need to pull cards back to your hand. You have the scroll rack to help you just move around cards and try to get what you're looking for. But this is just, it's such a fun deck. Either you will lose on about turn 4 to a really good aggro style deck like Sly or White Weenie, or you will grind out a 20 or 30 turn win with this deck. And it almost becomes comical playing this deck because the game just goes on and on and on. And for so long, you seem to just do nothing. You'll basically draw a card, maybe throw down a land, and that's it for your turn. And you just do that again and again and again. The action happens on your opponent's turn when you counter their spells, or the end of their turn when you capsize some permanent, or you draw a card, or something like that. And so it's just a whole different play style. It's really interesting, and it makes a whole different tempo to the game because the game just goes on so long, and it's just such a weird way to win. The one thing I'll point out is there's no Force Spike. You remember Force Spike is the 1 blue mana counter spell that is counter target spell unless its caster pays an additional 1 colorless. That's not in here because obviously these games go long. Both players end up with plenty of mana, so there's just not much time that spell can be effective. And so instead we just have the classic counterspell, the mana leak, which is a little more expensive but a lot better version of the force spike, and so it's countered unless they pay an additional 3. This one's really good. The forbid, which if you don't buy it back by sacrificing cards, it's just a 3 mana counterspell, which you may or may not think is good. And of course, you can just throw phoenixes out of your hand and then buy them back with their ability. So you have this great ability to just cycle cards around, pull things in and out of your hand, in and out of your graveyard, clear the board, and slowly grind out a victory. It's a lot of fun of a deck, and it's this weird kind of in between of, it's kind of like a light control. It's not quite a heavy control like a rack balance deck or a stasis or something like that, but you have this one silly creature, a 5 mana 2/2 flying that somehow grinds out the win. And it's just a great fun deck. You should put one together and play it and just enjoy it. If you like this kind of thing, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade. Thanks.